Everyone. We're going to talk about Chapter 2 of 1984, George Orwell. Again, if you don't have the book, pick it up. There are various copies, usually involving an I. Okay, so we talked about Chapter 1. If you haven't already seen that video, please go check out my other videos. Chapter 1 of George Orwell's 1984. Like, subscribe, share, please. I would really appreciate it. And we're going to talk about Chapter 2. It starts off with Mrs. Parsons and Tom Parsons and their children. Mrs. Parsons is Winston's neighbor. Winston is requested to come help her unclog a drain. And while they're there, while he's there fixing the drain, the Parson children are playing a game where they pretend that one is a former thought criminal, Goldstein. Okay? And the reason why we talk about the children in this chapter and why it's important is that even the children in this book are brainwashed via the party and for the party. Because remember, ignorance is strength. So if you can corrupt these children at a young age, because remember, Winston is committing a thought crime, and the chances are he's committing it because he remembers what it was like before all of this totalitarianism. So before the party took over and it was Big Brother and whatever, he's still of the generation that remembers what the real freedom was like. Not freedom is slavery, right? So it's important that this party and Big Brother are corrupting children at a very young age and incorporating them into hate sessions, to know who the traitors are and to identify them and to rat them out, even if they're your own parents. Okay? So they're actually fostering the next generation of party members. And in case we didn't talk about this earlier, the party is, a small section of people. There's the inner party, the outer party. So Winston, basically the rest of the population is the outer party. And there will be thought spies and criminals. So people will be committing the crime of thinking. And within their own outer party members, which is where Winston is, Mrs. Parsons is, her children are outer party members. Like, not that important, but important because they're sheep. They will rat out other outer party members in hopes of moving up in the chain and maybe possibly becoming an inner party member. And then there's even a smaller subsection of who's actually in charge. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So let's not forget that. It's a theme that runs throughout the book. So in this chapter, Winston is harassed by these Parson children, calling him a thought criminal like Goldstein and pow, pow, like we're going to kill you and we're going to hunt you down and whatever. So it's a little unnerving for him because they don't necessarily know that he's guilty, but he knows that he's guilty. So even though he knows that he has to continue with this diary and this thought crime, he still feels guilty because he's so loyal to the party. And he only knows the party as his truth right now. And he's wrestling with the idea that his truth could be something else. And that he's actually committing this crime. So then he goes back to his apartment and he continues to write and think, recalling a dream he had where O'Brien, who is an inner party member, says to him, "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness." Foreshadowing. Okay. That's when he realizes, when that happens though, that this, like, he has the wholehearted, like, he gives in to the idea that yes, 100% this diary is going to be his death. Okay, so it adds to the fatalism in chapter 2 that chapter 1 started. But the important part of this chapter is that Winston is beginning to think again with rational thought. Like, how can anything survive or exist if the past isn't allowed to exist? So what he does in his job is he rewrites history to suit the party's needs. Okay? So in doing that, in doing his everyday task, and being the good worker bee, he thinks, well, crap. How is it that anything can actually survive and exist? Maybe like he starts thinking, which you're not supposed to do. Don't forget, it's a big no-no to think. Don't think. Just be a good worker bee, good sheep, and keep your eyes looking forward and don't look at any of the stuff here. And this is very common for many dictatorships in the past to control the history. We can talk about it's a way of controlling your population where if you're constantly rewriting past, it makes people question what really happened. So Hitler's done this. Stalin was known to do this. Mao, Trump, Stephen Harper. I don't want to mention Trump because I don't want to alienate anyone who might be listening that is interested in this book, but I have to use him as an example. I use my own former prime minister too, Stephen Harper, as an example, where a lot of politicians will maybe fudge the numbers of what are the truth of their budgets or whatever the case may be. Oh, we had a surplus of $15 billion, when in fact, I can give you a Canadian government example. Stephen Harper came in and said that, we have the biggest surplus in history, or we came in with a debt, when in fact, when he came into power, there was a budget surplus in Canada, right? But because he distorted those facts of the past, when he was in the future, he said people actually believe that in Canada, that he had a budget surplus as opposed to the largest debt in Canadian history under any prime minister, which is crazy because people will argue this with me, and I know for a fact that there are different reasons as to why he had the largest federal debt. But because he blurred history, nobody really, people who are very one-sided in their information will only think that he's telling the truth because they're very loyal to him. Whereas my vote's always up for grabs. I'm dead center. Not left, not right. I'm dead center. And I believe in the process of democracy. That's a different story. But it's very important that Winston starts to come to this realization that if I'm constantly rewriting or a part of rewriting history, how can anything actually exist, right? And this is the bigger idea that Orwell wanted you to understand. So the other idea is that thought crime does not entail death, it is death. So that is a big, huge thing. It is so foreign to these people to think for themselves that they know that if they do, they're dead meat. They're done. They're dunzo, kaput. They're gonna die. That's it. There's no question about it. But he knows and he becomes more drawn into the idea that he will die. And because of this he essentially lives his life with more risk from this point forward. Knowing that he's going to die, he knows, well, shit, let me just take the risk now and do whatever I want. And he becomes more bold in future chapters because of this fatalism. He knows he's going to die. So it's like when people live their bucket list, once they know they're going to die, and they just go do things, they spend their money, they do whatever. And that's the same idea here, but he's going to die for thinking. So that's the important part of this chapter. Think about that. I want you to think about that and maybe draw some real world conclusions as to who else might think like that. I can give you the migrant situation when they're in their countries. Syrian refugees, Rohingya Muslims right now are leaving their country because they think if they stay there, they will die. And that's an important idea. Any sort of martyr, it doesn't matter what religion, what culture. When someone is a martyr, they think, well, there's no more point. I can no longer live in this society and feel safe. So I might as well go out with a bang, right? And that's usually what suicide bombers come from. or martyrs in general come from, that they think that there's nothing to live for it. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. So might as well just go out with a bang. And that's what's important about this chapter. It's Winston realizing that he is stuck between a rock and a hard place, and it's time for him to just live his life with more risk, which goes against the party. It's his woke moment, people. He's waking up. So that's chapter 2. Hit like, hit subscribe, please share, and please subscribe, because I will not know if people are actually watching this or if I'm being helpful unless people comment, like, subscribe, share. Chapter 3 coming up.